Ladies and gentlemen, you see, sometimes the most painful silence isn't a sign of your inadequacy, but a symptom of their inability to meet the depth of your soul. We have all stood in that quiet hallway of the mind, right? Waiting for the echo of a voice that used to be a constant presence. There is a specific, heavy kind of grief that comes with a phone that no longer vibrates. A digital ghost of a connection that once felt like a lifeline. When someone stops reaching out, our first instinct, is to look inward with a critical lens. Softly, we ask ourselves, was I too intense? Did I say the wrong thing? Am I simply not worth the effort? This internal interrogation, well, it is what we call the architecture of silence. We begin to build a prison of self-doubt using the bricks of someone else's absence. We treat their withdrawal as a performance review of our very existence. But today, I want to challenge that perspective. We must ask the central question that defines our emotional well-being. Is this silence a verdict on your character, or is it a revelation of their internal capacity? True connection, it requires a certain frequency, a shared resonance that allows two people to see and be seen in their rawest forms. However, the reality of human psychology is that many people move through life with a limited psychological bandwidth. This is a threshold of emotional intensity and maturity they simply cannot cross. When they encounter someone who offers genuine depth, sincerity, and true vulnerability, well, it can feel like a mirror reflecting back their own limitations. Their departure, more often than not, isn't a rejection of your light. It is a retreat from their own shadows. As we move deeper into this exploration, we will uncover how this hidden bandwidth limit explains their disappearance, without ever laying blame at your door. Direct, profound. You see, some people leave not because you are too much, but because they realize they are not enough to sustain the space you occupy. Let us begin to deconstruct why their silence is actually a loud testimony to their own jury, not a final judgment on yours. Ladies and gentlemen, when the notifications finally stop, and that silence, well, it grows heavy, our first instinct is rarely, if ever, to look at the other person. Instead, we turn the lens inward, often with a harsh, even unforgiving focus. Measured. This, you see, is the beginning of what we call the anatomy of self-interrogation. It is a grueling mental trial where you serve as the defendant, the prosecutor, and the judge all at once. We find ourselves trapped in the social mirror effect. Because we are social creatures, right? We often struggle to see our own value in a vacuum. Instead, we look at the reflection of ourselves in the eyes of those we care about. When someone retreats, it feels as though the mirror has been pulled away, leaving us to wonder if the person we thought we were has vanished along with their attention. We begin to believe that our worth is a variable, fluctuating based on someone else's ability to remain present.
This leads to the psychological exhaustion of the detective. You know this feeling well. Those late nights spent scrolling back through months of digital footprints. You dissect the subtext of a text sent 3 weeks ago. You analyze the timestamps, the punctuation, and the shifting tone, desperately hunting for the mistake. You were looking for a singular moment where you were too much, or perhaps not enough. Hoping that if you can just identify the error, you can somehow fix the silence. It is a heavy, draining labor that leaves you depleted, convinced that your personality is a puzzle with a missing piece. But as we sit in the weight of this self-imposed interrogation, we must pause and consider a shift in perspective. We have spent all this time wondering what is wrong with us that made them pull away. But ladies and gentlemen, have you ever considered that it wasn't your stagnation that drove them off, but your growth? Inspiring, what if the very version of you that you are now criticizing is actually the version that became too bright for them to handle? This brings us to a chilling realization about the nature of human connection that most people are simply afraid to acknowledge. Ladies and gentlemen, you see, we often interpret silence as a final verdict on our character. We assume that simply because someone stopped calling or texting, they must have weighed our value and found us wanting. But I want to propose a radical paradigm shift, right? What if their departure wasn't about your lack of worth, but about their lack of capacity? In psychology, you see, we can look at this as a capacity threshold. Every human being, and I mean every human being, possesses a specific amount of internal bandwidth, the emotional and mental energy required to sustain a connection. When you are committed to your own growth, when you are healing, and when you are demanding more out of life, your frequency changes. You begin to operate at a depth, one that requires a certain level of accountability and emotional presence from those around you. Ladies and gentlemen, is where the friction begins. For many people, you see, your evolution is intimidating. It isn't that they don't like the new you, it's that the new you acts as a mirror, reflecting back to them the parts of themselves they aren't ready to face. If you have done the work to establish boundaries, to speak your truth, and to inhabit your power, you are essentially inviting them to do the same. But what if they aren't ready? What if they are comfortable in the shallow end of the pool, while you are swimming in the deep? The truth is, they didn't necessarily choose to leave you. They simply reached the ceiling of their own emotional capability. You see, they hit a threshold where the cost of keeping up with your spirit became too expensive for their current internal budget. It's easier to go silent than it is to admit, I am not equipped to handle the person you are becoming. You must realize that silence is rarely a commentary on your value. It is a confession of their limitation. You did not lose them. They simply lost the ability to navigate the terrain of your heart as it expanded. You are grieving an abandonment, but in reality, you are witnessing an incompatibility of depth. But ladies and gentlemen, while we now understand the internal limits of their capacity, there is a much more subtle, almost invisible force at play here. It's a psychological phenomenon, that occurs when someone realizes they can no longer control the narrative of who you are. And the moment they realize they can't keep you small, their silence becomes their only defense mechanism. Which leads us to a question we rarely ask, right? Was their silence a withdrawal, or was it a form of protection? Ladies and gentlemen, when we are met with silence, our first instinct is often to turn inward and become a detective of our own perceived failures. We reread old texts, replay past conversations, and analyze every subtle shift in tone, as if a hidden clue will finally unlock the reason for their departure. But here is the first pillar of what we call the protocol of emotional sovereignty.
You must cease the interrogation of your past self. You see, you cannot find new answers in old memories. The version of you that existed then did their best with the information they had, and no amount of rumination will change the outcome of a story that has already reached its final page. Searching for your worth in the wreckage of someone else's silence, well, it is like trying to find light by staring deeper into a shadow. Calmly, the second step requires a shift in your fundamental physics of connection, and that is adopting the law of reciprocity. In the vacuum of someone's absence, we often feel a desperate urge to fill the space by reaching out further, trying harder, and essentially shouting into the void to be heard. Steady. But ladies and gentlemen, if they have withdrawn their presence, you must gracefully withdraw your pursuit. Your energy is not an infinite well. It is a finite and sacred resource. To spend it knocking on a door that has been intentionally locked from the inside, it is to rob yourself of the warmth you could be finding elsewhere. There is a quiet, monumental power in matching someone's distance with your own stillness. Finally, we must confront a psychological trap known as the sunk cost fallacy. This is the phenomenon that convinces us to keep investing in a failing situation simply because of how much we've already given. We tell ourselves that we can't let go because of the years, the effort, or the emotions we've poured into the relationship, right? But those years are already spent, and staying trapped in the why only costs you your future. This is the moment for a radical pivot towards self-actualization. Strong. Redirect that investigative energy, that deep, searching focus you've been using to track them, and point it back at your own life. When you move from asking, why did they leave, to what can I build now that I have this energy back, you transition from being a spectator of their life to the architect of your own. But ladies and gentlemen, while reclaiming your sovereignty is the path to peace, there is still one lingering shadow we must address. We often think that by letting go, we are losing the battle. We worry that if we stop caring, we are letting them win the breakup or the fallout. Yet, what if I told you that the most devastating thing you can do to someone who expects you to chase them isn't anger or even confrontation? It is something much more profound that shifts the power dynamic entirely, and it's the one thing they never see coming.
That devastating shift, ladies and gentlemen, is the transition into what I call the sovereign sanctuary. It is the moment you stop treating the silence as a locked door, and you start seeing it as a private, sacred space. When you finally stop looking for their name on your screen, you finally begin to look at the person holding the phone. You. In the world of psychology, we often discuss the concept of external validation, the idea that our worth is merely a reflection of how others respond to us, right? But when someone stops reaching out, they inadvertently give you a profound gift. It's a true opportunity to build a sanctuary of self-respect that no longer requires a second set of hands to remain standing. You see, the silence they left behind is not a void. Firmly but softly, it is a mirror. It is an invitation to listen to your own needs, your own rhythm, and your own quiet strength. We must realize that their exit was never a commentary on your value. Enlightened, it was simply a clearing of the frequency. Visualizing, think of your life as a landscape, measured. Sometimes the most beautiful structures can only be built once the old, unstable ones have been removed. Direct. By stopping the chase, you aren't losing. Empowering. You are reclaiming the energy you once used to bridge a gap that the other person was no longer interested in crossing. Ladies and gentlemen, their silence isn't a mystery to be solved. Wisely. It's a space being held for someone who doesn't require you to diminish yourself to be heard. Validating. You are not a puzzle piece that didn't fit. You are the entire map,
and they simply didn't have the capacity to travel the distance with you. As we conclude this journey today, I really want to hear from you. Curious, have you ever found a deeper sense of peace only after someone stopped reaching out? Encouraging, how did you turn that silence into your own sanctuary? Kindly, share your stories in the comments below. Altruistic, your insights often provide the very breakthrough someone else in this community needs to hear. If you found value in this deep dive into the human psyche, I invite you to subscribe to Mindscapes Explored. Inviting, join us as we continue to navigate the complexities of the mind and find the philosophical grounding we all need in an ever-changing world. Grateful, thank you for your time, and remember, your worth is inherent, and your sanctuary is yours alone.